journal that she went into Mexico or something and bought drugs or something, like prescription drugs for the emergency kits. And when she came back from that trip, before she even brought the bags into the house, she pulled me in and said, I want to talk with you. And that's when she asked me to leave. And that was July 20th, 2022. My interactions with Jody at that point became one of Jody. I was still in the men's groups, but the dynamic changed. Instead of being like one of the top people that helped run groups and helped support, all of a sudden I felt like I got knocked to the bottom. And Jody was just piling on me every week in the men's groups. And the other men just do whatever Jody does. If Jody piles on somebody, they all pile on. If Jody praises somebody, they all praise. And so it really felt like a pack of dogs, and Jody was the alpha. And whoever she, sicked the dogs on, they would go. Whoever she praised, the dogs would just lick them up and down. And that's how these groups went. And so once I was in separation, every week was just hell, psychological hell. And Jody was running it. Everything was on Zoom. And I knew that the only way I would ever get back into my house was I had to get Jody's approval. Because if I didn't get Jody's approval, I would never get Ruby's approval. But it felt like an impossible task, because no matter what I did, no matter how much I tried to track better, be truthful and not be selfish, every week it was like, you're being manipulative, you're being selfish, you're lying, you're hiding something, you're still hiding stuff. And I really started to question my sanity, honestly.
This is Jody that we were talking about.
Mm-hmm. And so that continued for an entire year, but it became more and more and more and more and more isolating until Jody had an approved list of men that I could make phone calls to, and it was basically 3 men. But all 3 of those 3 men were like, we don't want to do phone calls with you anymore because you're being manipulative. And I'm like, well, who told you that? Well, Jody did. So I was completely cut off. And if I went to my church leaders, I was seeking enablement. If I went to my family, I was seeking enablement. If I went to anybody, I was seeking enablement. And so it felt like a no-win. I felt trapped. And that's where I was all the way up until the last week of July, when Jody called me one day out of the blue and just said, I don't understand why you're not getting it. You're not changing. I don't get it. So I've been asking God what to do, and God told me that you need just to have complete, what's the word they would use? Solitude with God.
Become a monk.
Yeah. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, I don't want you to come to men's group anymore. And I don't want you to do phone calls with any of the men. And I'm like, well, then who am I going to talk with? Who's going to support me? God will. You need to learn to go to God. And so I'm just like, there's nobody. You're just, I'm going to be completely cut off. And she's like, no, you'll have God. So that was the last week of July, and that was my last interaction and contact with Jody. But it was strange because at that time, around that time, things with Ruby started picking up, and I didn't understand why, but like Ruby wanted to meet in a parking lot and wanted me to sign over titles of documents, like the two of our cars wanted me to sign them over to her name. And
To Ruby.
but I was like, okay, you know, I'm just not, I'm in total compliance mode at this point. Just like, I'm a good husband, you see, you can trust me, and so whatever she asked, like, sign over the cars to me, no questions, just okay. And then another thing, she was like, I might want to do an investment, but I will need your signature. Do you trust me enough that I could get your signature if I wanted to pursue my own investment? Yeah, sure. Whatever you say.
How big of an investment? What's she talking about? What did she tell you?
She never did, and I never signed anything. She never brought anything to me. But when I returned to the house, everything was packed up, and a neighbor came over and said she asked for the HOA rules and mentioned to him that she wanted to rent the house out, which I was like, yeah, are you kidding me? And apparently she wanted to sell the house, but couldn't because my name is on the mortgage. And I think that's what she was talking about, of, will you sign something if I just put it in front of you? And you know what? I probably would have. Like, that's how messed up I was.
I'm glad you didn't.
Me too. That would have been disastrous.
Yeah.
But I can't describe to you what torture and hell it was to live an entire, it was more than a month really, in complete isolation. Believing that I was like evil and, I mean, manipulative and lying and selfish, and that I had abandoned my family, and that I was more interested in my selfishness than my family.
And I think moving forward, you going through that is going to be extremely helpful. I felt that way because a lot of those are the same words that were used with them, and you're going to understand how they felt, you know.
We've already talked about
Yeah.
that, actually. And the couple of times we've met, I've said, this is how I felt. Did you feel that way? Like, yes, this is how I felt. Like, when we each confess to things that we didn't do, I'm like, I confess to things I never did, but I was so scared. And he's like, that's what I did too. So we connected on that level, you know, and it's crazy that anybody can get to that level of desperation, but we were there. We were there.
Oh.
And this was the end of July, what you're saying? End of July 2022, or the last time you saw Jody was
23.
23. Okay.
The last communication I had with Jody was the last week of July. Might have been like the first couple days of August, but just
So
that
it was just
little
shortly
time.
before we made contact with you.
Yeah,
Or
a
you
month.
made contact with us.
A month before.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for that whole month, my life was literally wake up, exercise, go to work, pretend everything's okay, come home, do connections like workbooks and read scriptures and try to strip selfishness out of my life. Like, go to bed, wake up, repeat every day, boom, 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 boom. I mean, I was so upside down. And my plan was in 6 months I get to reach back out to Jody again, and she'll let me back in the group, and then I can prove. Oh, I don't know if I heard a door knock, but
I don't know if I did too.
Might be your kids.
might be. Oh,
And we can,
has it been an hour?
Almost.
I told you it wouldn't take an hour.
So take a couple minutes.
I I'm
And
sorry.
we're good too if you need to head out. That was seriously,
I guess
we
the
just
only-
wanted, yeah.
The only questions I would have, and just going back, you said that she was having